I'm warming up my coffee. There we go. Good morning. I brought a whiteboard today. Oh, well, welcome to the highlight of civilization. You know, it actually is kind of like the highlight of civilization. I feel like every day, you know, we're going through a very unusual period in human history. So when Mr. Adams would say, "Welcome to the highlight of civilization," that's a fantastic frame. Let's go ahead and do this. Simultaneous sip. All you need is a cup, a mug, or a glass, a tankard, chalice, or stein, a canteen, jug, or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better. The simultaneous sip. 1, 2, 3. All right. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about a frame that my family's used for a long time to try to think about how we achieve goals, and linking this back to a lot of Scott Adams discussions about similar topics. I don't think that it's contradictory to. I think it builds upon and just kind of provides like a more structured mathematical framework for thinking about it. So without further ado, here's my big wow movie magic moment. Okay. So I have a few books here that until I get a more proper setup, and hopefully this will work. That's not bad. Not bad at all. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Ta-da. Okay. Get this a little closer. Okay. So let's start with algebra class. Y equals mx plus b. So this equation is often used in algebra to introduce students on how to relate two variables to each other, two or more variables. A lot of math comes down to understanding relationships between things. And when this equation comes up, the teachers are usually trying to introduce students to a coordinate plane. So this would be y. And this would be x. And if b equals 0 and m equals 1, then that just relates y and x. So if you've got y equals 1 times x plus 0. So you're just relating y to x. So if x equals 1, y equals 1. Really straightforward. Okay. But one thing I didn't like about algebra class is that the teacher wasn't really relating these things to anything real. I want to do that. Let's change y to something that we care about. And that might be something like, say, happiness. There. Now we care. A little face on it. Now look at that happy dude. I'm not the best drawer. But then what might these other letters refer to? Let's go ahead and explore these 3 letters. Okay. So M I like to think of M as a map. This is a map that provides meaning through assignment. Okay. If you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, then his book Maps of Meaning, provides somewhat of a conceptual understanding of this, but it's not coming from that. It's just if you happen to be familiar. He wrote a book called Maps of Meaning. Okay, so that's M. Now let's go ahead and talk about X. X in this case is, let's say, all of the different things through which you might possibly derive a sense of good and bad, or have some judgment about. So your circumstances, okay? I think that's right. I went to public school, so my spelling was horrible. Yep. There we go. So these would be your circumstances. So let me give you an example. Let's say that there's nothing in this world except a bunch of cookies. You're sitting at a table, you like cookies. And the more cookies you get, the happier you are. Because you think, you perceive cookies as giving you, let's say, 1 happy point apiece. All right. So your X is a bunch of cookies. On a plate. Those are my cookies. You got 3 cookies on a plate. All right. And let's say that you like cookies. And so for you, every one of those cookies is going to give you 1 point. So your N equals 1. 1 times 3 cookies. So what does that do? This leads you to having 3 happy points. All right. Now, in this case, we haven't talked about B yet. So just ignore B. But the idea here is that you believe cookies make you happy. And so what do you want to do? Well, one thing you could do is you could try to eat all 3 cookies. Right? If you eat all 3 cookies, you believe the map is telling you that each one of these cookies is going to give you 1 happy point. So that results in 3 happy points. All right, now let's talk about B. B is a baseline. By baseline, I mean, this is just the level of happiness that you might feel regardless of how many cookies you have. All right. If nothing's impacting your happiness in terms of circumstances, and circumstances, of course, can include, and by circumstances, I mean X. This is your perception of your circumstances. So if you perceive yourself to have a nice house and a good job and a family that loves you, or like whatever the things are, or maybe it could also be bad things. You perceive that you're in a war-torn country. You perceive that you're ugly. You know, whatever it is that you perceive, and then you have this map to it that then takes whatever your perception of your circumstances are and maps it to how happy you believe you're supposed to feel. Okay. But some people, seemingly without much influence from whatever they perceive their circumstances to be, and however they're mapping those, they might just generally be in a happier, more uplifting, joyful mood, or less so, right? And that would be B. So you can think of B as like a baseline. Okay. Okay. Can you do things to improve baseline? Yes. One example would be gratitude journaling. If every night before bed you just go through and consciously think about all the things that you're grateful for. Think of 5 things that you're grateful for. That's a gratitude journaling exercise. Meditation exercise, the kinds of things that you almost like generically get as advice for trying to help yourself. A lot of those things might fall into baseline, right? So we can have some influence on that. Genetics probably play some role in it, although You know, the more I learn, the more I think that when people say it's because of genetics, what they're really saying is that they don't know. They don't know why. So they just attribute it to genes as like a catch-all. Okay. So what does this simple little equation say about 3 models for finding happiness?
Basement door.
Well, you've got 3 variables. Those 3 variables provide 3 anchors through which one can try to improve happiness. Probably the most straightforward one, the one that kind of comes by default, would be, well, the word that I like to use for it is the hedonist. Hedonic treadmill, hedonism, trying to get whatever you want, basically. Very common. So if you're going to approach this the first way, number 1, is to maximize circumstances. So what does that mean? That means if you perceive a larger house or a prettier girlfriend or boyfriend, or having more money, or whatever it is, you perceive something as being something that you want. Because the M associated with it, your map, is some positive number. We're not talking about whether or not the actual true value of this thing is positive or negative. It's more about, well, how do you perceive it, right? So one obvious way that a lot of people think about to try to become happier is to get whatever they want. So that's maximizing X. So you could think of this, a lot of work is happening in here. You can actually think of M and X as being infinitely long vectors. Think of all like generic things that a lot of people think they want, right? So X1 equals money. X2 equals beauty. X3 equals knowledge. As examples of things that X can involve. Try to get some of that screen glare away from my axis. There we go. Okay. Oh, that was way easier to just move my move my whiteboard. Okay, so you've got all these X's. Now, how much value do you put on these things? That's M, okay? So you might have M1, M2, and M3. All right, so these are the M's, these are the X's. If you are familiar with matrix algebra, then this will be easy. If the phrase matrix algebra makes you nervous, don't worry, because it's not really that complicated. All it means in this case is that big M actually relates to a whole lot of little m's. In this case, like an infinite number of little m's. So it just keeps going. All the way to like M infinity. All right, that little 8 that died is the symbol for infinity. Same thing for X. X infinity. Y infinity. Because humans are capable of imagining an infinite number of things they think they want. That's a lot of life. Is people imagining things that they think is going to do it all. In fact, this book, Happier, is really good at explaining some of this stuff. And we have a bunch of different books that we read and continue to read and reflect on and write. But this one here by Tal Ben-Shahar, PhD, Happier. Learn the secrets of daily joy and lasting fulfillment. This is a good one. There's a whole bunch of other ones too that I could share. But the idea here is that if left to our own imaginations, we can think of an infinite number of things that we either want or also things that we don't want. So like here, I'll give you an example. So, X doesn't have to just be things we want. X could also be things like, cavity, right? Like on your teeth, you got a cavity, and it's very unpleasant, right? Another one might be, let's see. Your commute to work. Maybe you don't like commuting to work, right? So that's totally fine. It's really anything. So it can be good things and bad things. But the assignment, the M, that's an important part of this, because your M is what you believe to be the value of this thing, right? So maybe for every dollar of money, you might have an M that's equal to, I don't know, 0.2 util points. Utility. That's another word that economists sometimes use to refer to happiness. You can say that this is utility. Maybe for beauty, you might think of beauty as being some number between 0 and 10. And like, some people will say like, oh, well, she's a 10 or he's an 8 or what have you, right? So if we use that, then maybe we would say for every number along that metric of beauty, again, this is a mentally contrived perception. But let's say for every point of beauty on that scale, we award ourselves 5,000 utils. So if you're a 10, if you believe you're a 10, right, it's your perception. Well, then that would be 10 times 5,000. That's 50,000, which sounds like a lot until you remember that this is all hypothetical and all these numbers don't really mean anything except in relation to each other, right? I could do this whole exercise and bring all numbers up or down by an order of magnitude. It doesn't change anything. 5,000, I pulled that out of my bum, right? That's not really the point. The point is that I do want this scale to make sense, and that for every dollar that you have, let's say that you feel like, oh, I'm going to get 0.2 utils. So if you get $5, that's 1 util, right? But in order for you to have money equal to 1 point of happiness, right, what would that be? Let's see. Well, we would need $5 for 1, and then times 1,000, or five for 1, and then in order to get to 5, we need 5 more. So that's $10. And then 10 times 1,000 to get to 5,000, right? So 10 times 1,000 is 10,000. So this would say that 1 point of happiness, or 1 point of beauty on this scale, is roughly equal to 10 grand, right? I don't know. Maybe that's true for somebody, at least in terms of how they perceive it. Because again, this is how we as individual humans perceive things. That's what this model is based on, right? Like, what if somebody owns a house, but they're not aware of it? They wouldn't derive any happiness from it, right? What if somebody doesn't care because they spent years practicing being a monk in a monastery, to lose all connection to feelings of joy or happiness from their circumstances? We'll get into that. That's a little bit of a different route to get there, but you get to the same result. All right. Knowledge, how would you put that? Maybe with knowledge, maybe you conceptualize knowledge as like a degree, or how many books you've read, or maybe you don't think about that at all. But you would have some way of trying to relate what you perceive to be how much knowledge you have and how much joy that brings you, right? So you'd have some number here too. I don't know what it'd be. But this is what we're really looking at. You're looking at a giant vector, M and X, of an infinite number of things that people can imagine that they either want or don't want, and an infinite number of things people imagine to be how much joy or happiness they derive from those things. And that would be the hedonic approach to thinking about happiness. Okay. Now there's another way. And this other method, I would say, is one of thinking about what you want to want. This would be, you could think of this as being like more of a stoic approach, or one of intentionally trying to appreciate things that you believe deserve more appreciation, or trying to let go of things that you found to not be as valuable to yourself as you might have previously thought. So I'll give an example. Let's say that you're a child and you don't like brushing your teeth. So in this case, brushing your teeth might actually be one of these things. Let's go ahead and put this up here. Every time that you brush your teeth, you're like, I don't want to brush my teeth. Parents with really young children will know what I'm talking about. and your M, the map, how much you perceive the happiness associated with it, minus 20. No wonder those kiddos don't want to brush their teeth. They perceive it as taking away their happiness. So what do you do? Well, at first, they might try to avoid brushing their teeth. Because if they do, they're going to lose 20 happy points. But what if they could change how they feel about brushing their teeth? Now that's a big moment. That's a big moment. And that, I think, is the biggest leap that separates a lot of humans from each other. If I were to use a single metric, a single quality to try to put all of humanity into one of two groups, be like, there's two kinds of people in this world. There's people that, and then you got the dichotomy. I think that this is probably the biggest one. There's people that focus on trying to get more X. That's changing their circumstances. That's like the kid that they don't like brushing their teeth, so they're going to try to avoid brushing their teeth. And then there's people that realize that maybe their map needs some work. Maybe their map's off. Because the map, and this ties it back to Scott Adams a bit, in the sense that he talked a lot about affirmations, deciding what your goals are, right? And instead of having lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, like I got a little infinity sign here, right? Instead of having lots and lots of things that we're imagining that we want and chasing after all these things. I want beauty. I want knowledge. I don't want to brush my teeth. All these things. That instead, we think, well, what really matters? What matters the most? And also, what kinds of things maybe I feel like I don't want, but I kind of wish I did, right? So like, here's a different way of thinking about cookies. Earlier, we were talking about cookies. Kids like cookies. Everybody likes cookies. I mean, for the most part, not everybody, but cookies. I like donuts personally. But what if I started gaining a bunch of weight? I was trying to lose weight, but I still really like donuts. What if I told myself, I wish I didn't like donuts so much. Wait a minute. Can you do that? Are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to think about just wishing that you wanted different things? Maybe the way that you feel about something should change. And that's where we're moving into this new approach. I'd call this, this is like, maybe it's the enlightened approach. I don't know if that word is too strong, but I do know that thinking about circumstances a lot can get one into trouble. So if you're trying to change, if you're intentionally trying to change your map, I think a lot of what that demonstrates is agency. You're deciding for yourself over time through your actions, training your mind to try to map intentionally how valuable you want to perceive things. Now that's different than how we start out. When I started out, I'm pretty sure I didn't like brushing. And I'm pretty sure that if I saw a cookie, I would try to get it and eat it. I don't do that now. Why? I changed my map. Or maybe my parents helped when I was young, with those things. But I've definitely changed how I perceive the value of things on several occasions during my life. And that's definitely something that I taught my kids. And they use this all the time. And they seem to be navigating things very well. So I think that the key question here is, what do you want to want? What do you want to want? You may not want it, but what if you wanted to want it? Like, I don't feel a strong urge to exercise. I haven't actively tried to cultivate a desire to exercise. But if I wanted to exercise, if I got to a point where I was like, hey, I want to exercise, then I know how to will myself to actually change this mapping and see more value in exercise. But I think that that's a different way of thinking about it than, oh, I don't want to do this thing, but I'm just going to power through and do it. And I think affirmations help with that, to visualize that. I think that's what Scott was doing, essentially, with these affirmations. He was imagining a future state in which he was affirming to his subconscious, here's what I want. Help me get this thing. So he's elevating the M, for example, associated with becoming let's say a successful investor. That was something that he wanted to do, right? Successful investor. And he's going to put, I don't know, let's say 1 million euros being a successful investor. And all of a sudden he starts, his subconscious is like, all right, let's do this. And starts to buy Chrysler. That was one of the things that happened to Scott, was shortly after he started affirming this idea to himself, oh, I want to be able to pick stocks in the stock market that shoot up 1,000%. And he claims, and I don't deny it, I think that what happens is the subconscious is so powerful relative to our conscious minds that there's a lot happening there. And our subconscious can definitely drive us towards achieving extraordinarily powerful goals. And that's basically what Michael Jordan did. He just said he wanted to be the best basketball player in the world. And he said that a lot. And his subconscious was like, okay, let's go. Slight pivot around 1990 with Phil Jackson saying, hey, Michael, you've been MVP a couple times, but we want to be like the best team. So if you could tweak your goal function a little bit, instead of like successful basketball player, best basketball player, how about a member of the best team? Right. And so that was something that Michael Jordan had to go through like a reframing in his mind back in, I think this was like late 1989, certainly through 1990. And then once he was kind of really had aligned with this, Phil Jackson really got through to Michael Jordan. And, by the beginning of the season in 1991, he was there. He was ready. He had a new goal. It was to be a member of the best team. So I think that people can do this. I think it just takes consistency. Like Scott had mentioned, that it might be 10, might be 20. For his speech struggles, it went on for 3 years. So for bigger goals, for more powerful goals, for more challenging kind of shifts in perception, it just takes more consistency and more effort. Okay, let's talk about the third way, because there is a third way.
Basement door.
The basement. No, the baseline. Okay. So the baseline, I have a good name for that one. And that's the monk approach. And you think, well, like, what is a monk? Well, a monk, stereotypically, I'm not trying to get all woo-woo here. Let's take Sound of Music. In The Sound of Music, there's a woman who she joins a convent. I think it's a Catholic monastery, and decides, I don't want to try to seek out true love. I don't want a family. I just want to love God. I'm going to stay at this monastery. I'm going to be a nun. Nuns live like monks. You're basically giving your life up to a higher power of some kind. You don't own anything, much of anything. Monks and nuns, they live in, at least traditionally, they live in very sparse environments without hardly any possessions. They eat simple foods, and they serve the church or the temple, or various religions all have some form of something of like a guru. In Hinduism, there's like all these various gods, and the gurus, I'm not an expert, but like the gurus of particular gods within Hinduism will just give away all their possessions and be reflecting on the teachings of their particular guru, or their gurus study under gurus, and they live their lives without all of these things, but they're spending so much time focusing on, I'd say, just letting go of attachments. That's a really easy way to let go of attachments, is to just not have much. Like, we had a house fire 3 years ago. So we lost all of our possessions. We didn't own any things. That is what you might say is like the expedited fast track approach to becoming less attached to your possessions, is if they all just burn and light on fire, and then they're all gone, like in a few hours. It was pretty traumatic. Well, if it's gone, then you can sit around feeling miserable about how you don't have all your stuff anymore, because that would, a house fire, if you lose everything in a house fire, which we certainly did, it's like whatever value we placed on all those things we owned, multiplied by all of those things disappearing, you can see how a house fire would be very devastating to people if they have strong at least beliefs that those things are adding to their happiness. If somebody were to suffer a house fire, it should probably be our family, because we were sort of already in this mindset going in that we don't really want to be cultivating a belief that our happiness is attached to our circumstances, which can include all of these things that we own, right? So in The Sound of Music, there's and I forget her name. Sound of Music. I should probably look that up real quick. Sound of Music summary. Okay. What's her name? The Von Trapp. Maria Von Trapp. Story of the Trapp family. Maria. A free-spirited young Austrian woman. Yes, Maria. Okay. So Maria is actually convinced by one of the other nuns at the monastery to go out and to actually try to find love, and don't throw away everything in the world. That would be like this, basically. It's like all of the things that could be and what value you assign to those things. And if you become a monk or a nun or otherwise try to detach yourself from these things, you could think of like Siddhartha Gautama. That's the Buddha. That's basically what he did. You know, he lived in a palace. He had everything. His or at least everything, and like that's the kind of the gist of the story, is that he was a young prince, and so the things that a lot of people are striving to get, he already had. And so his story is that he goes out one day and he sees that there is suffering in the world, like that people grow old and get sick and die. And so he decides, you know, I want to try to have a different way of perceiving the meaning of life than this sort of zero-sum game of, you know, trying to hold on to as much stuff that I consider valuable as I can before I die and it's all gone. So he spends a lot of time by himself out in the woods under a tree or something along those lines. Basically, let it all go. Let it all go. Might as well have just had a house fire. Just like let it all burn, you know. But what are you left with? And I think that, you know, his story very similar to the story of Viktor Frankl. And he was a Jew who was in a Nazi concentration camp and was there for several years and nearly died of starvation. And just about everybody that he knew was murdered by the Nazis. And he comes out, he writes a book. And Viktor Frankl very much kind of, I think, is more a closer to modern day example of a very similar kind of arc, in the sense that he had nothing and thought he was going to die all the time. So this would be his ex, not including the kinds of things that people normally associate with what they would want to help them become happier. What at least the folks that we hear the stories about, I mean, there could be millions and millions of people that attempt to try to go through something similar and fail. But at least the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the story of Viktor Frankl, and the story of many other Stoics and monks and people that essentially tried to let go of whatever they inherited from their parents or their culture, or maybe even themselves, in terms of what they perceive to be their circumstances and how much they perceive those circumstances are deriving their happiness and how they feel. But that baseline, if you just take that out, and say, no, circumstances don't matter. Just let it all go. It's just this. What is that? This is basically what you're able to find just within yourself. Another source on that would be like The Peaceful Warrior, which is a movie. It's also a book, and I believe the author is still alive and has a blog. But the idea here is to reflect on, well, what are all the things that I can do, just in terms of how I frame my own life. So this kind of gets to framing, which of course, Scott talked a lot about. That don't involve me needing to change anything external to myself, my circumstances. And if it doesn't have to do with all these things outside of myself, then I also don't need to worry about trying to assign value to all those things. Those things just are, right? And if you practice that, or your circumstances in life kind of put you in a situation where that is optimal. So like being a Jew in a Nazi concentration camp, if you're sitting around thinking about how shitty your circumstances are all the time, that's going to make your life harder than if you're thinking, well, I have an imagination. I have free will. I can actually control my conscious experience with practice. And that's ultimately what Viktor Frankl was actually teaching the Nazi prison guards towards the end of his stay. So, yeah, those are some really extreme circumstances. And I think for the vast majority of humans, we try to avoid these sorts of circumstances. Although in some cases, like Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, he forced that circumstance on himself. He let go of it. So I think that all three of these approaches, whether you're focused on your baseline, which is like this monk approach, just reject this idea that you want your own happiness tied to your circumstances at all. But then there's also thinking about, this is like the way that we start out, thinking, oh, I want the cookie and I don't want to brush my teeth, that would be the focusing on circumstances. And then there's the high agency, and I would say also high impact people. Although monks can be extremely impactful. But if you lose all attachment to circumstances, you can also lose motivation to want to change your circumstances. So I think that's a risk of going down the monk route, is that you can kind of rid yourself of motivation to want to change the world or change your own situation, right? And so this approach here of actually just trying to intentionally shift what it is that you really want by changing how you perceive value. Deciding intentionally what you want to want. think that's been a mental model that I've reflected on for many years. I found it to be very useful. This is a very simple model here. But yeah, 3 variables that play into how happy we are. And if you want to, you can try to affect 1, 2, or all 3. But if you're stuck thinking that X is the key and M is something that you can't change, that's just given, that's not a good place to be. It's not true. A lot of the way that we perceive the value of things, we don't even determine ourselves. It's, like 2 years ago, nobody cared about Labubus. And then a year ago, a lot of people started caring about Labubus. And now that people are losing a lot of money on ridiculously overpriced stuffed animals called Labubus, they're thinking maybe I shouldn't have attached such a high value to Labubus and whether or not I own one. I think we can get ourselves in trouble when we forget that our perception of this is subject to our own choices about what we focus on, and the value that we place on those things is often something assigned by other people and is not really intrinsically true about the value of our circumstances. It's sort of made up. Who's on the stairs? Oh, I thought we might see one of the kiddos, but all right. Well, that's it. That's what I wanted to share. I also had a few other books. I picked these books on purpose. I really like these books. Here we go. So, Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. I'm sure anybody here that's heard of Scott Adams knows who Jordan Peterson is. So I won't spend a ton of time on that. But yeah, I'm a fan. And Dale Carnegie is someone that Scott Adams took a class inspired by. Love this book. This is, I was actually given this book by my boss when I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a consulting firm. It was like maybe 15 years ago. And just not a very good title. Oh, wait, let's see. Wait. Whoa. This says How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Sorry, this is actually not the right book. 1 second. There it is. Okay. How to Win Friends, Influence People. I don't like this title. A lot of people don't read this book because the title kind of implies how to make a lot of shallow friendships and manipulate people. And that's not really what this is about. I think it's really more about first principles and timeless truths about how to get along and cooperate and collaborate and communicate with other people. And that's very important. And I already mentioned happier. Tal Ben-Shahar. Okay, well, there you go. Well, let me know what you think. I'm enjoying this. Like I said, I've actually been doing this for years. I just wasn't sharing these publicly. But I'm enjoying it. And And I think Scott Adams was onto something. I think that there's a model there for how to, certainly for people that have, had enough experiences and are comfortable, are aware of, how messy the internet can be and how careless and sort of shallow people can be, and just not letting the noise of the internet really bother you all that much. That's a pretty tiny percentage of people, honestly. But I think it's good. I think it can be very good for the right people to just try to, speak from the heart, share what they believe to be valuable, especially for themselves and especially for their loved ones. And in today's digital age, there's a lot of other very creative, useful, valuable things that one can derive um, from taking the time to build a habit to do that. You know, so yeah, feel free to share your thoughts, and also feel free to check out wequel.com. My family's been sharing more on our blog, and we've got a lot of exciting ideas we're kicking around on what to do next. So that'll be a place to go. But until then, you can count on me, at least for a while, to keep chiming in here and showing off my kitchen cabinets. So, cheers.